ethics, aesthetics, and the algorithm.
Hi everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about my thesis, Muslim apocalyptic thinking, as we just heard, politics, ethics, aesthetics, and the algorithm. It's a mouthful, and if you have suggestions for better titles of the presentation, let me know. I have a few points of departure that are kind of stories that I'm going to present first, and then I'm going to talk about the content. I'm hopefully going to give you a little taste of each kind of chapter. But my points of departure, my first point of departure for this thesis is one particular moment in Batir, an ancient Palestinian suburb of Jerusalem. I was there in January 2020 on a class trip with the Religion Conflict Peace Initiative, and we arrived in Batir Solomon. We were fresh from seeing the horrors of an occupation military court in the West Bank. Our host greeted us with a meal entirely grown in their own gardens. It was beautiful, just banquet. We walked in the gardens afterwards, and it's like that sadness and that heaviness we felt was sort of drifting away. We could even see Israeli watchtowers in the distance. It was under surveillance, and this tiny town existed for a long, long time. And yes, as we're walking in the garden, an apple fell onto the head of one of my classmates, and everybody burst out laughing. This laughter ushered in the first moment. Our host, still laughing, pointed to the terraces and said that we call each of these a little Jannah, a little slice of heaven. It's playing on the Quranic name for heaven in the Garden of Paradise, Jannah al-Firdaus. So that's my first point of departure, that moment, that laughter. The second one is the hadith that everyone's sick of me talking about. 2 months later during the pandemic, Sheikh Yasser Fahmy told a Zoom class that was pretty much freaking out about the pandemic, hadith, right? Relation of a saying of the Prophet Muhammad in Islam, that if you're planting saplings or seeds when the hour comes and you have one in your hand, the hour being the end of the world, you still plant the sapling. That totally hit me and sort of started getting my gears turning about the first garden from a few months before. There's something in the laughter and there's something in the inherent value in cultivation in the garden metaphor. So I was thinking about those two. My final point of departure was the Cornel Westism. He has a lot of isms that he says everywhere he goes to. One of them was, it's not so much a matter of getting into heaven as much as a matter of how much heaven you're leaving behind. So I'm thinking, okay, heaven as a garden, mutual cultivation, how much heaven can I leave behind? The world looks like it's falling apart. It's 2020, I'm locked in my room, I'm crying a lot. You know, it was gross, I'm eating junk food, it was sad. And taken together, I was wondering, how do I leave heaven behind? And I tried reading a lot of stuff about garden ethics and eco-theology and eco-anarchism, and I wasn't finding a lot of positive content. And what I realized is that instead of looking for the language for heaven, I needed a better language for the hell that we're in. The hell that we kind of heard a little bit about just now. So I had found a copy of John Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation when I was getting ready for that trip to Palestine. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what postmodernism really was. I didn't know who John Baudrillard was, a French postmodernist thinker. He had this idea of simulation, right? I was astounded to find that he really thinks we're in the Matrix, and he's really kind of right. He contests that we live in a simulation, a hyper-reality constructed by consumerism that rots to the existential level. I was sold on this take for a while because, yeah, it seemed to take all the best of Marxism and all the best of sort of the anarchisms and stuff I was being exposed to, but again, not sold on. I was just watching YouTube videos about leftisms. It wasn't, and then this, you know, this kind of made it into this existential sort of big framework that really clicked for me. But then I got a TikTok, and I noticed that there needed to be an addendum to the simulation that could be helpful in understanding capitalist hell. TikTok introduced me to the capital A algorithm, who is the primary villain of the story I'm telling. To me, the algorithm is an interlocking web of systems, material, social, digital, and hypothetical, that are currently propping up violences that are global, local, and internal. It is a digitally enhanced simulation, where the simulation can not only see you, but even know some version of you based on your desires. Your For You page calculates based on your eye contact with your phone, which TikToks it thinks you're going to look longer at. So in this way, the simulation is sort of bending to our behavior. The real scandal of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, that's not a scandal at all, right? All politics are algorithmically mediated now. All consumerism is algorithmically mediated. We're in a quantitative system. So that's what I mean by capital A algorithm. It's a funny kind of boogeyman scare word that I use because I wanted to work negatively. Working constructively about proximate imaginations was really fun for a while. But I think the thesis sort of gets activated thinking about these sort of garden aesthetics. Or my points of departure is also clicked when I was like, oh, it's against the bad guy. So the algorithm is, yeah, it's loose and it's fun and it's a little bit boring, but it's about coercion through the calculation of desires. And I want to look at alternative calculations. So this is where I land my primary sort of research questions. What is being in the world but not of it? What could that mean for a Muslim in this world? How can we ground some sort of Muslim critique or Muslim leftism, a skeptical relationship with capitalism and the state? How can we ground that within the tradition rather than importing an anarchism or a communism into Islam? And can we have fun doing it? So I tried. I tried to have fun doing it. My thesis articulates the confrontation with the algorithm in 3 different interlocking dimensions: politics, ethics, and aesthetics. Each of these styles or each of these sort of confrontations required a different style of writing. I wouldn't say it logically required it, but it sort of was bringing out a different kind of voice in me. And I was, encouraged by people at HGS to embrace that. So the politics kind of reads as a manifesto. I don't really cite anyone in the text, and you can kind of see Ibn Sina's in there and whatever. But sort of I'm saying, oh, previous scholars have said this. I don't really it's a manifesto about why I'm doing what I'm doing. Secondly, the ethics really becomes an academic sort of piece. I'm kind of in the weeds with Judith Butler mostly. And finally, aesthetics, where it's more like an artistic manifesto. It's how can we imagine around this sort of shift against the algorithm that I'm calling for? And finally, because almost everyone I was citing was sort of crazy, and wrote sort of crazy, from Ibn Arabi and to Deleuze and Baudrillard, a lot of Sufi thinkers and Muslim mystical thinkers that I was working with are famous for using poetry and using sort of poetic styles to get at really complicated things. Their word for God would be capital T, truth, capital L, love, capital R, real. And you have to sort of play with how God is it's playful. And Deleuze is doing the same thing. But a lot of these thinkers are kind of often written off too by establishment figures, because of how insane they are. So I also had a little bone to pick about saying, okay, you've called a lot of these thinkers, a lot of people have dismissed these thinkers as useless, especially because of how they think. So I wanted to demonstrate thinking that way in a way that I really do think is useful. So to that end, between chapter 1 and 2 and chapter 2 and 3, I included freakouts. Freakouts were where I just let language do its thing, and it was sort of an aestheticized, sort of ranty, I fit all the stuff that I couldn't cite or prove in the thesis into these little cracks between the chapters. So for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to just really briefly kind of go over what the politics argument was, what the ethics argument was, what the aesthetics argument was, and then, inshallah, we have time, I'm going to read aloud one of the freakouts. This is a problem. But first, experimental politics. So the politics chapter is trying to look at the radical political potential in divine witnessing and setting up in sort of framing the Muslim epistemological worldview that you don't really believe in God as much as what you bear witness to creation as it unfolds in front of you. You take the Shahada, which is a bearing of witness to becoming Muslim, right? So my argument here had 3 propositions. First of all, taqwa, which has been translated as a fear of God, but really should mean a consciousness of God. And in this chapter, I'm using the word capital U, unity, as God. So taqwa, understood as consciousness of true unity, reminds us that we are contingent, interrelated beings. What we are in creation is totally dependent on all the rest of creation, right? Creation is that web or network. Second proposition is our contingency implicates us in the world around us. So taqwa demands an intervention against injustice. So if we're in the same web where all the violences are happening, and it's the violences that are making us, then we also are sort of held to account to respond to the violences. So when you're conscious of God and you're sort of conscious in that way, you become conscious. That consciousness itself is there's no mediation between that consciousness and action against injustice. So those are the 2 propositions. The third proposition is then a collective commitment against injustice implies a need for Muslim emancipatory politics as a vessel for ethical action. Meaning, okay, if we're all sort of seeing the same thing, this injustice, and we're creating it as much as it's creating us, as much as it's all sort of fundamentally part of the contingency that it can be held against the capital R real, which is God, then what we have to do, we really have to act. So what it boils down to is observing that cultivating God consciousness by recognizing the contingency of our systems and ourselves should also motivate imaginative experimental approaches to production and social organization that afford dignity to all human and non-human beings. games. Basically seeing the God in the self, in the other, in the animal, in the mineral, in the least of us, in the most of us, seeing sort of the God within creation is a call towards treating that creation properly. Again, this was kind of big manifesto, political, sweeping writing. It was fun to do. I don't know if I'm ever going to do it again. But that's how I sort of said that there's a call to think deeper here. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2 is where I get into the nitty-gritty. I take the Garden of Paradise as an ultimate telos or end, and I attempt to flesh out an ethic of mutual cultivation, which is what I think goes on in a garden. To do so, I refined Judith Butler's decentered ethic. I merged her presentation of subject formation, which is like building on Foucault, with Al-Ghazali's spiritual anatomy, which is like a sort of presentation of what a self is, broken down into a few other selves. You have the akal, which is the rational mind that can take in information, adjust, make rational or logical processes. You have the qalb, which is the heart, which Al-Ghazali calls the throne of God, and the heart of the believer, right? So that's like the throne of God in the person. And then you have the nafs, which is like the lower self, or the ego, which is also sort of tied to material selves and desire. And then you have the ruh, the soul, which is like the spark of divinity that animates the being. So you have these 4 presentations of the self, and they sort of overlap, and they're like, there's there's too much to draw, I'll skip this. But you can draw this basically. Never mind. We're here, it's okay. So, this is the self, right? And so, we have you have the akal, that's like thinking, right? The goal, that's like the heart, where sort of you're just like animated affectively around God. The nafs is about desire. And then the ruh is light that's shining through it, like divine light that's shining through it. And all of that can be a conception of self. I thought that conception of self was cool, and putting it in a circle is even cooler because of what happens next. So basically, putting this together with Butler's presentation of subject formation as a critique, she was like refining Foucault and giving account of himself. I found Muslim spiritual cultivation as itself a form of critique. Meaning, against the algorithm, Muslim spiritual cultivation, meaning working all of this, Muslim spiritual cultivation can be understood in the process of aligning these 3 so that the light shines in sort of purely. So you basically, are a vessel for God's love on earth. So I quote Laura Marx, who is the scholar of Islam, says that if protocol is the architecture of networks, critical politics needs to focus on the protocol, a system of relationships in which information and materiality are inextricable. So I was thinking, what is the protocol of the algorithm? And network politics, just to understand, is a presentation of politics where subjects are nodes, and we understand them through the relationships. And so she's talking about, critical politics is about the relationships between all the nodes, right? And what I'm finding in this circle is, this thing right here is highly unstable. And what Laura Marx notes is that this instability has politically radical potential. So you find the algorithm, right? And I said the algorithm was based on the calculation of desires. So in the capital A algorithm, these are just sort of relations based on what your desires are. What you're being shown on your TikTok is kind of what you're looking for in a very nufsy way. However, if you animate the very same networks with the root, you have God's light shining through, because this materiality, the information exchange and the material exchange, I explain more when I have 10 or 20 pages to talk about it, but you kind of see where I'm getting at, I think, maybe, I hope. But I'm going to move on. I finally land on aesthetics for my 3rd chapter, that basically what this shift is from the green to the orange just now is a shift in consciousness. And so that comes to aesthetics. There's a story in Rumi's Mustafi of a lion that was like a tyrant, and it's terrorizing all the little mammals, right? And it's the hare is okay, I'm gonna finally handle this. So the hare is just walking by the lion, and the lion's aren't you scared? I'm gonna eat you, I'm a tyrant. And the hare's I'm not scared of you, I'm scared of the other lion. And the lion's there's another lion? And show me the other lion. So the hare kind of hops away, and the lion follows, and takes him to this big sort of cavern with this light. And the lion sees this massive lion on the wall. And so there it is. And hare's oh yeah, it's a scary lion. So the lion jumps at it and falls down into this big hole and dies. What the lion had seen was its own shadow. So Rumi uses the hare as basically this sort of Sufi analogy But then all the mammals are like really excited. They're like, the hare is our hero. The hare has conquered the tyrant. And the hare says, don't celebrate yet. There's one more lion to be killed. That's the lion inside of you, the nafs. So basically, I find a consciousness. This whole thing started with taqwa, right? God consciousness. So in aesthetics, I basically look at psychedelic art, surrealism, comedy, laughter from the outside. And I come back to that laughter that we had in the theater. That laughter that sort of reveals contingency. And it ties to this project that I'm interested in, as communism. The idea that you can sort of read politics by dissolving or like revealing the contingency of existing structures and existing relationships. By revealing the contingency, you open them to critique, but you also open them to mockery and just like a ton of fun. And maybe the ethical engagement in politics. So basically, if all of reality can be proven a dream in relation to the capital R real God, why not dream a better dream? So that's the aesthetic argument. Those are my 3 chapters. And if we have, I'm just going to read one of the freakouts. Cool. So that's the academic argument. And then this is freakout number 1. He goes, yes, we have heard it all before, but what's old news when I'm eating analog clocks out of cereal bowl? Yes, the revolution is circular, but what's another go round anyways? Nobody wins on a roller coaster. This rubber tire turns, slips, skids towards Judgment Day. Head on, or the aporia, or Abraham's silence, or fear and trembling, because all is an assemblage. Hope, fear, wonder, bound together by 2 numinous strings, the present and the rupture of horizontal time. So jump in the line, rock your body in time, leap in faith, strive in faith. Here is the rose, dance here. Oh, that was the rose? We should have danced there. Is anybody else growing roses? Zulfikar could vanquish any enemy except the one who sat at the face of the one who held him. Parishan, or the atom bomb, or Majnun's hair, or scattered in subatomic. Lover, 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 come back to me. That's Leonard Cohen's fault. That's not my fault. Even the fire is green and the children are changing the rules in the middle of the game. Do you know how your parents met? When Sky saw sea and said, what now? So Adam raised a Cain, so why can't I? In California, they're still saying Tim Shell, and when the floods come to our gardens, our gardens will make the water smell good. Split the atom in the mind. Time for a rose-scented apocalypse. For all the ripples, there's just one wave. Creation surges back to the creator. Every birth is Genesis, and every death is Qiyam.